Hi everybody, welcome back. We are looking today at Jeremy Duff, Elements of New Testament Greek. We are in chapter 11 and we're looking at the subject of the second aorist. Now if you remember the previous video, we introduced the second aorist, and the key thing that I said is that when you're trying to form a second aorist or trying to recognise it, what you're forming or recognising is change stem, imperfect ending. And the challenge, of course, is to remember the stem changes. There's nothing much we can do about that except to encourage you to learn them, and also to say that, as I mentioned in that video, when I've taught people English as a second language, I've been amazed by how quickly they have got to grips with the irregular English past tense, like swim, swam, and I suspect, therefore, that you will find it more easy than you realise to learn these if you just put your mind to it. So crack on with it and do that. But what I want to show you today, of course, is the other moods, because we looked just at the indicative in the previous video. If you look at Jeremy Duff, Elements of New Testament Greek, page 127, he highlights that the other moods have something slightly different about them, and you'll be able to figure out what this is if you just think for a moment. Think what you do in the indicative to form the second aorist. You change the stem and then you use the imperfect endings. Well, why isn't that going to work in the other moods? The reason is very simple. There is no imperfect in the other moods. So which endings are you going to use? Well, it's very simple. If you don't have the imperfect endings, as you don't in the imperative and the infinitive and the participle, then you just have to use the present endings instead. So that's what you do right here with these second aorists, which I've indicated in the right hand column here on this table. Let me show you what this table is all about. I've got the imperative here and the infinitive here. We'll do the participle in a second. And just to remind you, I've got luo written down on the left hand side. So we've got present, singular and plural, aorist, singular and plural. And then we've got present and aorist, infinitive. So I don't need to, well, maybe I'll write that down for you. Go on, that's singular, plural, and this is the present, and this is the aorist, singular and plural, and then this is the present and aorist infinitive. There, I'm feeling kind today. But look, you've just learned that luè, luete, luson, lusate. Luè, luete, luson, lusate, and then you've learned luein, lusai. Well, then we're going to go over to a verb that forms its aorist by using a second aorist, and we're going to use the paradigm verb ballo, I throw. And so here is the present stem, bow, and that's the stem that we use in the present tense in the other moods. And so when you're working your way through the imperatives, it goes balle, ballete, all nice and straightforward. But now you need to form the aorist imperative, the equivalent of luson, lusate. So what do? Well, you can't just stick the sigma suffix on and put the aorist endings on. That's not how you form the aorist in the second aorist, in verbs that employ a second aorist. You use the changed stem, which is bow, with just one lambda. Remember that? Go back to the previous video if you don't remember it. Bow, but then which endings do you use? Changed stem, imperfect endings? Ah, there are no imperfect endings, so we use the present endings instead. So it goes balle, ballete. And you can see now why some students are going to trip up, because they're not going to switch on and pay attention to the fact that you've got the changed stem here. It is really, really, really important that you pay attention to the stem. You remember way back when we introduced verbs, I said the first thing you've got to do, you've got to look at the stem to identify what the verb is. Now you can really start to see why that's important, because although you're pretty good at Greek now, you've got over halfway through Duff's book, if you don't look carefully at the stem, you're going to misread this and you're going to think it's present because you say, oh, it's an e or it's an ete, and you've not looked at the stem, and therefore you've forgotten that it's an aorist because it's got the changed stem present endings. So the rule is changed stem, imperfect endings. If there are imperfect endings, if there aren't in the other moods, it's changed stem present endings. Very simple. And so, no surprise, when we look at the infinitive, you can already see what we've done here. This is the present infinitive, ballein. But we're not going to go balsai. Oh, you know, we're going to change the stem present endings. Ballein, ballein. And notice the difference just in the number of lambdas in the stem. Exactly the same thing happens with the participle. give me 1 second and I'll write it on the board for you, and then we're done and dusted and you've got this nailed. Back in a moment. Oops, don't make that mistake. Okay, so here we go. This is the participle of luo, and what you've learned is luon, luontes, lusas, lusantes, all very straightforward, and that's doing the present first, singular and plural, luon, luontes, then the aorist, singular, lusas, lusantes. You've got the sigma suffix. As always in the other moods, there's no epsilon augment. There's no need for an epsilon augment because you've only got 2 tenses, so you only need the sigma to distinguish them. So what do we do with a word like ballo that forms its aorist by using a second aorist? Well, ballon, ballontes, but we're not going to go balsas, balsantes. We're going to go change stem, bal, just the single lambda that I forgot almost when I was writing it out on the board a minute ago, and the present ending. We've got no imperfect endings, so change stem imperfect endings unless there is no imperfect ending, in which case change stem present endings. Change stem present endings. Really, really straightforward. Again, really what it boils down to is, are you willing to go the hard yards and learn those verbs? Now, the interesting thing is they're actually reasonably common, and if you just have in mind the possibility of second aorists, what's going to start happening as you read the New Testament, and especially as you do some of these examples, is the fact that the stem has changed is going to prompt you to think, oh, it's a second aorist. Goes back to the advice I gave in the previous video. If something just doesn't look right, it looks like an imperfect, but it's the wrong stem, or it looks like a present, but it's just the wrong stem, then check for a second, is it a second aorist? And even if you couldn't remember exactly what the second aorist is, then effectively it's written down in front of you if it's in Greek going into English, so that it reminds you of it. But it does come down to this thing, right back at the beginning when we were doing verbs, and I said, didn't I, look at the stem, pay attention to the stem, and if you don't do that, you're going to skim straight over it and shortcut. You'll go to the ending, you'll assume it's present, or you'll assume it's imperfect in the indicative, and you're going to make mistakes. So look at the stem, learn the stems for the second aorists as much as you can. You'll be absolutely fine. Do some of these examples, and then we will crack on with the rest of this chapter. God bless. Bye for now.